Hi class, I'm going to have to upload the video for my progress on this in stages, so be prepared for part 2. So I'm starting out with a peach color to just kind of block in different tones in lighter parts of the face. The important thing with these crayons is you layer up color in bits on top of each other. You don't try and go for the whole thing all at once. So I'm filling in the areas that I know are going to be light. Then I'm going to go in with my red brown and my reddish color to block in my areas that I know are going to be shadows eventually. And right now I'm just kind of creating a map. I'm not outlining anything. You want to really avoid outlining in these stages because you'll create harsh lines that you can't get rid of later. I'm adding a little bit of pink to the skin tone to kind of warm it up a little bit. You got to be careful. Some of these you have to test a little bit to layer them on top of each other to see how they're going to behave whenever you do layer them on top of each other. So right now I'm just looking at my reference picture and I'm just paying very close attention to the blocks of color that I'm going to need, the areas that are going to be necessary. I've also erased some areas. You can't see all of my structure lines that were on the face, the lines for the eyes and where the nose went, and all my measurements because I erased those before I got started on the face structure. You can see a few lines underneath the chin where I changed the angle of the jaw and the chin several times. I was working very light because I didn't want the graphite to gray the areas of the face that were going to be light. So I had to be very careful about that. So whenever you're drawing, usually whenever I'm doing a portrait, I start with a reddish colored pastel pencil. It's kind of very deep, dark red, kind of a red ochre. And that's how I lay out everything. But this time I had graphite with me at the time because I was working on this during my plan time at school to kind of show the kids what was possible with crayon. So I decided I'd keep on working on it so they could see how it progressed over time. As I'm watching this and as I was working on this at the time, I realized that the chin angle was off. The chin needed to kind of be a little bit more pointed and come down a little bit. So the nice thing about these crayons is that I can actually take that lighter peach color and put it on top of my darker areas and it'll actually show up on top. These are made for layering. You kind of paint with them. Technically, this might be called a painting. Chalk pastels are considered painting, even though it seems like it's a drawing material. Because you're creating layers on top of each other, a lot of times those things are considered paintings. Now I'm looking at the shape of the shadow on the neck and I'm sketching it in, trying to get that right. Over the process, I found out that the darker brown that I started using for the shadows, once I started layering the flesh tones on top, it kind of started to look at a little blue. There's probably some blue in it when they made brown. Blue is often a color that they use to make browns and blacks. And so then I started actually using for my shadows, my darker areas, a olive green color, which really contrasted nicely with the red and pink tones of the flesh. So I was really pleased with how that turned out. So now I'm just kind of looking at my lighter areas. And as I started working those flesh tones in the lighter colors on top, I really was able to blend and create some nice contrasts, get the angle right on the eyebrows and things like that. Whenever you do shadows on a face, you actually want to be careful. You still want to be able to see the features through the shadows because shadows by nature are transparent. So you want to make sure that you don't use black. You really want to avoid black. And you really want to avoid making the whites of the eyes overly white whenever there's a lot going on as far as shadow and direction. If you make the shadows too dark and the whites too bright, that will all lend to this feeling of flatness because black shadows are very flat. So I'm going in there with a colored pencil every so often to kind of make some stiffer lines the crayons I was using, the tips are not very, pointed. So every so often I'd have to go in and use a colored pencil in an area that needed just a little bit more of an edge. So I went over the whites of my eyes with that brown right there so that it would tone down the white so it would look like white that had a shadow cast on it. And I'm working on the angles of the eyebrows and trying to get the eyes a little bit more accurate compared to the photograph of my daughter I'm working from. There you can see I kind of needed to kind of almost white out some areas with the peach color. The peach color was really useful as a blending tool. I would layer it on top of darker colors and you could kind of see the darker colors through it. And then I would blend and burnish to get the effect that I wanted. And I really had to pick away at the angle of the nose. It started feeling a little bit wide right there. So I really had to kind of measure using my eye as my reference point. So I had to work on that. And so I'm just looking at the shapes of the colors so that I will have the proper shapes to the shadows and shapes to the color changes rather than outlining any edges. You have to be really careful about that. Edges are commonly hard edged or soft edged. The leading edge of a shadow, like under the nose and places like that, will have some hard edges, but then you'll have other areas of the shadow that will have soft edges. So the shadow cast by the ear and the earrings here on the neck, trying to get that in the right shape. And you want to look at the overall outline of that shape whenever you're adding your color in and kind of create the shape rather than the edge of the shadow. And then you can go back and firm up any hard edges that you need and soften any other edges. So layering up the neck, getting things right there. It takes a lot of layers to really blend. And it's funny right now as I'm doing this voiceover and I'm working on that ear, I ended up having to move that ear. I got to measuring later and I noticed that the width of the area between the hairline and the corner of the eye, kind of where your temple is, was way too wide. And usually you can fit one of your own eyes within that space. If right now where you're sitting watching this, if you take your fingers and you put corner to corner on your eye gently, and then you try and keep that same measurement and go from the corner of your eye to your hairline on your temple, you'll find that that's usually one eye width. And so I was a little bit off on that. And in a future video, you'll see me kind of scoot everything a little bit. I scoot the ear in, I scoot the hairline in just a little bit. And if I'd not been in such a hurry with this drawing, I was so concerned about getting the face correct that I kind of ignored that a little.